welcome everybody to this edition of Nayanta Conversations. It's my pleasure to introduce Niranjan Thatte. Niranjan is a professor of astrophysics at Oxford University. He's part of an elite team at Oxford which is building a spectrograph, is that right? Which will go into an extremely large telescope, and he will talk later about why extremely large telescope and what it does. Niranjan and I go back some way because we were students at IIT Bombay together in the year 1983 to 87. But he has had a really interesting journey. Some other things about Niranjan, he topped the HSC. And that wasn't enough. He also topped IIT Bombay. He was the President's Gold Medalist at IIT Bombay in electrical engineering. Went on to the University of California, Berkeley, where he studied electrical engineering. And he transitioned from electrical engineering to physics at some point in time, and astrophysics. Then he went to the Max Planck Institute, where he was in research for around 10 years. And he's currently a professor of astrophysics at Oxford. Niranjan, a Nayanta conversation is a conversation, and these are all corporate leaders. And we are talking to leaders from different walks of life.
Okay.
So T.N. Nainan, the famous journalist, was here. Montek Singh Ahluwalia was here. Bimal Patel, the architect, was here. Chris Gopalakrishnan, a co-founder of Infosys. So it's really an elite group, and we're really happy to have you on this group being a part of it.
I don't know if I deserve to be in it, but anyway.
So, tell us a bit about early childhood, formative influences, growing up in Bombay, and we'll pick it up from there.
My father was a scientist at BARC for most of his life. And my mother was a maths teacher at Elphinstone College, and then at the very end of her career was the principal of Sydenham College for a couple of years. What do I remember about formative influences? The one thing that sticks in my mind is that every birthday present was a book. And it was what it was. It was just what you got used to. And I read a lot. I was mentioning to the kids I'm teaching here at Nayanta that the titles of some of my slides said, I had 4 volumes called Tell Me Why, More Tell Me Why, Still More Tell Me Why, and Lots More Tell Me Why. You may remember some of those from your childhood days. And so that was sort of my family. If you ask them what did I do as a child, I was known for basically asking questions at dinner table. And it was like, Pan Baba. We speak Marathi at home. So it was like, I was always questioning.
This may not be the easiest thing for you to answer, but I think it is helpful because it is pretty special to top both HSC and an IIT, right? Because HSC is one type of an exam and an IIT is a different thing. And we all would, I think, easily agree that there are at least 30 people in an IIT who are extremely intelligent, right? What do you think are the habits of a consistently good student? What makes a consistently good student? There must be something to learn there.
Yeah, I think part of it, which I got to realize after I got to Berkeley, was that confidence played a role. Confidence in the sense that if I sat in a classroom in IIT, the good thing was that we all were exposed to the same background. We had the same course structure. And so if the teacher was saying something which I didn't understand, I was fairly sure that half the class didn't understand either. And so I could put my hand up and say, but, explain this or that. When I got to Berkeley, I realized that people sitting in the courses there, graduate level courses, there were some for whom it was a minor, the US system being different from the Indian system, of course. And so they knew very little. A fair majority were probably in the same boat I was, which is that, we were doing them at the start of our graduate studies. Some were advanced PhD students who were working in that particular area and therefore knew a lot about it. And that actually made me very diffident because you didn't know if you were the only idiot in the class who didn't understand. And so that stopped me from asking questions in class. And actually asking questions in class, I feel for me, has been the quickest way I've learned. And so the nice thing about sort of the HSC and the IIT years was that I felt confident that I could ask.
Yeah, and I quickly didn't have the confidence to ask. It does happen, right? So that's very interesting. Since we're on IIT Bombay and Berkeley, teaching at IIT Bombay and teaching at Berkeley, not necessarily good or better might have an easy answer. How different?
I think it was very different. I think the IIT teachers were dedicated teachers. I think the Berkeley staff were mostly research professors, and this permeates through the US and the UK. I think we all do research, and many of us see the teaching as a burden in some sense, that, something we have to do, and we try to get ourselves out of it as often as we can. When we get to Oxford, I'll explain why we can't, but at Oxford, so I think IIT people were more dedicated. I remember one incident where Vasi, who was a very good prof that we had in electrical engineering, at one point I sat in the lecture and he and I were debating. Basically, the rest of the class was just sitting there listening, and when it got to sort of 10 minutes or 15 minutes that I had interrupted his lecture and I was adamant about some point, he has famously said to me, "I'll give you until tomorrow morning to prove to yourself that you're wrong." He was right. In retrospect, I was wrong, but I was so adamant. So then I shut up. But but they were really dedicated teachers, I think.
So it's interesting. So you're actually saying the IIT Bombay teaching was better?
It was better. It was more geared towards teaching because that was the only thing they were doing.
That's very interesting. And IIT Bombay itself has now gone more in the research direction.
So there is a benefit to being a researcher, which is that you keep up with this field and you are at the cutting edge, and that helps you to give the students the right sort of perspective. I mean, there was a broad range at IIT as well, but I think they were all keen to educate us, and I think they did a good job, right?
So, there is this thing that we are trying to do at Nayanta, where we believe that we will hire strong researchers, but also value teaching. So strong researchers and good teaching. And I think Oxford probably does that. You think it's possible?
It is possible, but I think they're different, right? Teaching is an art. I think particularly if you're lecturing to a group of 100 people, it's a performance. And I saw this at Berkeley. I was a teaching assistant for an astrophysics professor, Alex Filipenko, who was very famous. And he would go and he would perform for an hour, right? And I think some people can do that and others can't. And it is somewhat uncorrelated to your ability to be a good researcher. So maybe being a good researcher is a necessary but not sufficient condition to be a good teacher.
So necessary but not sufficient is actually a very, very kind of nice way to take it. So if you're looking at journey, there was IIT Bombay, there was Berkeley. How did electrical engineering to physics happen?
Oh, okay. So I graduated from IIT Bombay, top of my class, as he said. I had a bachelor's thesis advisor, Professor Sahasrabuddhe, and my bachelor's project was to build an echo canceller for phone lines, okay, which was digital signal processing. I'd applied to a bunch of US universities. Many of them had given me admission, some with scholarships, some without. Of course, in those days, you never traveled to the university beforehand, so it was all completely blind, which, some of them, Illinois was in the middle of the cornfields, but I wouldn't know because we had never learned anything about those places. We just went by reputation. So I went to Sahasrabuddhe and I said, look, I have all of these options, and I don't know which one to pick. And I really want to go to Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, because they have a great department in signal processing, and of course, that's what you do, right? You've done bachelor's, that's exactly what you want to do going forward. So he looked at me and he said, you will change your field of specialization 3 times in the next 10 years. I guarantee it. He was right, okay? But so he sent me to Berkeley and he said, go to a place which is big, where you can pick and you can decide what you want to do. So I get to Berkeley, I have a 1-year fellowship. Parents, of course, no position to ever support me in a US education, so you have to sort of figure out that you're going to get a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship within that first year. So I went up to Professor Messerschmidt. He was the known guru in digital signal processing. He wasn't taking any students that year. So I'm sitting there sort of cursing Sahasrabuddhe, why did he send me here? I have nothing after the first year. to support myself. So I looked down the list of faculty and I said, I came across a name, Jack Welch, or William Welch, and it said radio astronomy. So I had done some amateur astronomy when I was in school. I had built a little telescope, 6-inch Nehru Science Center, backside of Mahalakshmi in Mumbai. And we had, built the whole thing from scratch. It was kind of a fun thing. So I thought, okay, why not? Let's go talk to this guy, see if he has any students he's willing to take. So I went to him and I said, okay, I've done amateur astronomy. I'm interested. I would like to work with you. He said, okay. So he gave me a book, which is sort of the Bible of radio interferometry, and said, take this book, read it, and come back. So most of it was Fourier transforms, which, those of you who are electrical engineers, okay, you will sort of follow that, yes. And his generation, anybody who wanted to be a radio astronomer had to be an electrical engineer because you had to tinker with the equipment, right? I mean, Jansky's discovery was only 50 years old at that point. So radio astronomy is a very young field for his generation. Anyway, so he gave me this book and I tried to read it, and they were full of jargon from astronomy. I rather sheepishly went back to his office after a month and I said, look, I tried to read this book. It makes no sense. I don't understand it. So he said, okay, sit down. He pulled out some course notes from a course he used to teach in. Electrical engineering wasn't on offer that term. And he taught me some basics for an hour. And then he said, that's all I have time for today. Come back next week. And so for a whole term, I was going to his office and I was getting one-on-one teaching in radio astronomy. Wow. I was hooked. So I stuck with him. I did a master's on the way. I did a PhD. We built receivers, antennas for radio astronomy. And so that was my backdoor entry into astronomy. By then, I had already done the exams in electrical engineering. So all my PhD degrees, all my degrees for that matter, say electrical engineering, yet somehow they gave me a professor of physics in Oxford. So yeah, but it's not that different, right? I mean, that's what I was also telling the kids, is that you feel when you're growing up that your choice of major or your choice of discipline pigeonholes you to be a certain kind of person, and that's not true. If you look at the Oxford faculty, we have people who are chemists, we have people, in the physics faculty, right? We have people who are chemists, we have people who have been to industry and come back to academia in different walks of life. It is a very broad group of people, and I think that's one of the things I think we need to tell the students is don't feel like you are being pigeonholed by your choice of profession, because actually the cross-disciplinarity is what we all covet, right? Because that's where the new ideas come from, because you apply the ideas that is the established in your discipline to a different discipline, and that's what brings the novelty.
You just made Partha very happy. So that's one thing I can say, because you're speaking his language. But I want to quickly touch on the story you told about moving, because it's a theme in my life also, that accidents and the ability to take advantage of accidents defines a lot of our lives. Would you say that's true?
I think it's true, yes. So, opportunities are there. You have to take them, but I think you also have to persevere, right? And I think our head of department, when he teaches the early career people, he says, talking about job prospects and things like this for the postdocs, he says, if you don't apply for a job, you'll never get it. So, you have to apply. So you have to persevere, and yes, you need some lucky breaks. I think we all need lucky breaks.
Yeah, and I think it is optimism and self-confidence that helps you to see the break in the lucky break. Yes. Otherwise, you could treat it as a random event that has disturbed the plan, right?
Well, there's another aspect which you brought up, which is that your reputation precedes you in some cases, in others it doesn't, right? So if you move continents fairly early in your career, then your reputation doesn't come along with you, right? So when I moved from India to the US, I was a nobody. I had to re-establish myself from scratch. Whereas at IIT, I think maybe after year one, I was treated differently by the profs than they were treating you, because they know this is a person who knows what they're talking about. So I think re-establishing that reputation time and time again gets more and more difficult and more effort consuming, and some people just give up and they say, okay, well,
and probably curiosity still is at the heart of that re-establishing, right? You don't seek out trying to establish a reputation. You seek out excellence for its own sake, and reputation is a happy side effect, if that makes. So we'll move from Berkeley to the Max Planck Institute, a very prestigious research institution. First, let's talk about your experience and what you did there. And then I want to pivot, because I'm sure for Naushad it will be of interest. We'll talk about the German research ecosystem, but maybe your experience first.
So, yeah, I wasn't wedded to staying in the US after I finished my PhD, so I applied sort of worldwide because I wasn't, Berkeley is I don't know, those of you who have visited, it's a very non-American city with something called People's Park and so on. So, but anyway, that aside, I wasn't wedded to staying in the US. So I applied, and it was by chance. So somebody who I ended up working for, he has since gotten the Nobel Prize. He used to be a prof at Berkeley, so he knew sort of the groups there, and that's how I ended up at the Max Planck. I changed field very rapidly, was doing radio astronomy in Berkeley, was doing infrared and visible wavelengths when I moved to Germany. One of the first things I got was a project to build an instrument, and I needed some mechanical engineering help. The only in-house mechanical engineers they had were all full with other projects, as technical staff tend to be. So I was assigned somebody who was a consultant, so he would come into the institute as needed. This person spoke no English, I spoke no German. So the first thing I learned in German was things like Senkrecht. I don't know how many of you speak German, but I learned all the technical vocabulary before I learned any German of any other kind. But I think the director, who is Reinhard Genzel, is the person who then got the Nobel Prize a few years back. I think he was very happy to see somebody who was willing to sort of, experiment and build things and just have the goal in sight, and it didn't sort of matter whether you had a badge which said, oh, I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm an electronics engineer, therefore I can do this or I can't do this. You just, you want to build a physics experiment, you do everything is needed. You need optics, either you learn the optics or you get somebody who knows the optics to make it work, right? So it was sort of putting together. It was more the cohesion of bringing together the different experts rather than knowing how to do it all yourself. It was a good time. I think Germany has a good, so you talked about sort of German culture. So the Max Planck Institutes there are about, 50 or 70 of them in the in Germany that are span all aspects of research, including in social sciences and things. But the nice thing they have is that all of the directors, and there are sometimes multiple directors per institute, they have a lot of freedom, right? So they're given a whole chunk of money every year, and they can get to do with it what they like, to accomplish their research goals. But all of them sit in a society called the Max Planck Society, so they are all members, and the government in Germany gives a huge block grant to the Max Planck Society, but the nice thing is that it says you decide amongst yourself how it is to be parceled out to the different 70 institutes, right? So when one of the directors, I wasn't ever, is pitching to get money for their newest initiative, they are pitching to their peers. They're not pitching to ministers, or they're not pitching to government civil servants, right? And I think that system has its benefits. The status quo is that you get the same amount of money you got last year, but most of the time. But occasionally somebody may come up with a brilliant idea and say, look, I need extra money for 5 years to do this. And if they can convince their peers that that is worthwhile, then they will get the money to do it. So within the institute, it was very hierarchical, and it was a system where either you got along with your director, or else you would find you were always in their shadow, right? So you would, and that's why I finally left, is because he said to me, are you going to do X integral field spectroscopy for the next 10 years. I said, I don't see why not. He wasn't interested. So, in pursuing that particular sort of avenue. So then we parted ways and I ended up in Oxford, right?
Yeah, but getting back to the research ecosystem, that research happens in specialized research institutes.
Not in the university. The universities are
in universities and in corporations. How do those three work together, or what's the mix in Germany?
So in the industry as such, I don't know because I've never really worked in industry, but the universities are definitely the much poorer cousins of the Max Planck. So the faculty have very little funding for doing their research. The basic research is all done in the Max Planck. The applied research is all done in the Fraunhofer Institute. So there is another cluster of institutes called the Fraunhofer Institute. So they do all the applied research. So they are much more connected to the industry closely.
I see. And is there a move from the output of basic research to the input of applied research?
Sometimes. I think there's not a direct conduit.
Okay. I'm sure we might have questions on that later, but let's move from Max Planck to Oxford and talk about that move.
I was headhunted by somebody who was at Oxford. They said, why don't you apply? I said, well, I'm not going to get the job because I had zero teaching experience. Right, and it was in a physics department, so I said, okay, I'll apply. I went to Reinhard Genzel, my director and boss at Max Planck, and I said, I want to apply, and he, in his mind, knew that if I applied, I would get the job. I didn't know that I would get the job. So the day I said I'm going to apply, he wrote me off, right, as somebody who has sort of left his group.
It's a German thing.
I didn't see it like that. I said to him, why is he making such a big fuss? It's just an application. I'm quite likely not to get the job. So when I did get the offer, I went to him hoping that there might be a consultation about whether he wants me to stay and under what terms. At that point, he was not interested because, 4 months had elapsed since I had decided to apply, and he had already sort of made up his mind, okay, if this guy is going, he's going. So, I was sort of persona non grata from the day I decided to apply. But, in retrospect, I think it was a good move. I have my independence, as do all faculty in universities, and I managed to get research grant funding for, I don't know, 20 million pounds and counting probably at this point, but for doing a very big project. But so, yes, I think I managed to carve out a niche for myself at Oxford where I have a research intensive position, which means I don't have to do as much teaching as most of the faculty do. But Oxford is a very strange place. It's a collegiate university, so we have like 35, 40 colleges that are glorified halls of residence, but they're more than that because the students get very small group teaching there. So as a faculty, everybody has a joint appointment with the college and with the department. In the mornings, like in physics, in the mornings we lecture to them in groups of 100 or 200 at a time. In the afternoon, we teach them in tutorials in groups of 2 or 3. And that's not with PhD students or postdocs, that's with faculty most of the time. Okay, we can't cover all the subjects, but the vast majority of it. And I think that's the uniqueness of Oxford, is the small group teaching, right? I say to people, there's no escape at Oxford. You can't not show up to the tutorial as a student, but just like there's no escape for the student, there's no escape for the faculty either. I have to show up there, and I have to have read their, if I was in the humanities, it would be their essays. If I'm in the physics, I have to have looked through their problem sets and marked them, not mark them to give them a grade, but mark them to see what they did and didn't understand, because the purpose of the tutorial is to discuss what they didn't understand and hopefully expand on that. So there's no escape for them, there's no escape for me either, right? So it's a fairly labor-intensive system, which is why Oxford's total student cohort size is 20,000 and hasn't grown in the last 10 years, whereas most other universities have, right?
So a related question, I think you've answered it partially. We're starting a new university. I think we have the freedom to pretty much build it the way we want. That internal culture is there. The leadership, the founding team, all of us, they've given us that freedom also. what should we learn from Oxford? What should Nayanta learn from Oxford? I'm tempted to ask the corollary question, which is what should we not learn from Oxford also?
Well, one question maybe all of you should ask yourself is, in this day and age, why does education not upscale in the same way as many other industries do? Right. I have my own answer. Maybe I'll answer it in the Q&A, but I think I just want you all to think, why are we not taking basically the best lecturer at Caltech or MIT or Stanford or wherever you prefer, or, IIT Bombay, and just saying, okay, record that set of lectures. Here it is on YouTube. Everybody watch that lecture. I mean, this appeared 10 plus years ago as what we call MOOCs, right? These massively open online courses. But they're not taken off in the same way that one would expect in many other industries, right? So why does education not scale up in the same way as, manufacturing cars or spaceships or telescopes or whatever it does, right?
I can give you my answer. One is just product versus service, right? Services are personal. They're one-on-one. Teaching is a service. Learning is a personal journey. And it is both a rational and emotional journey. Therefore, I don't think it can be mass manufactured, because it is a function of the individual's we learn by relating new things to things we already know. The things we already know differs when you have a diverse class. So that's...
Yes, but so for people who are in the broader society like you guys here, I would say there is another role, which is the accreditation role that the universities play. So it's a badge, right? Coming out of IIT Bombay is a badge. And as an employer, you're not looking to see whether me is any different from him. It's just we are IIT Bombay graduates, therefore we are good to be hired by you, right? So the question is, how do you do that in a MOOC sort of environment? How do you give that badge that says, okay, you're good, right? And that serves, as part of our education, that serves a big purpose. But then there is sort of more the philosophical side of it, which is that there's education which sort of is, gaining factual knowledge or expertise in a discipline. And there is an aspect which is sort of learning. So I was telling a colleague here in Pune, actually, just a couple of days ago, my one-line summary of schooling and college or university. So in school, the purpose is to motivate you to learn. So a yearning for learning, I call it, right? If your school manages to keep you yearning for learning, it's done its job. For the university, the one-liner is, it's teaching you how to learn. It's not about the actual learning you do. It's about teaching you how you can synthesize what you get on Wikipedia and from the AI and from the Google answers into something which is actual knowledge that is applicable to the problem at hand. If you learn how to learn, you can then go and learn in any field. It doesn't matter if you graduated as an electrical engineer and you were asked to build a bridge. If you know how to learn, you can, you could be a financial hedge fund manager. It doesn't matter, right? So you're asking what should Nayanta learn from Oxford? So Oxford has the benefit that we have a very big badge, right? So when people come out of Oxford,
so we'll build the badge. That's fine.
Yeah. But the other thing is that I think we do value, or we try in our students to build not the typical person who will benefit society, but more sort of researchers, right? So there is a lot of emphasis on this learning how to learn kind of thing. So I think if you ask a lot of the faculty, the direction in which they push the students is more to become researchers, to be in that sort of, it's an elite class and it's learning for learning's sake sort of kind of thing. So it may not be...
I was listening to you and I think what you say is very interesting, but I kind of thinking it's an IIT Bombay, Berkeley, it's applicable for us. I think for the bulk of people, even who come into Nayanta, school has killed the yearning for learning. So we have to do both yearning to learning and how to learn.
Yes.
So then, how would you approach that?
It's difficult, right?
That's why we have the foundation we do, I think.
Yes.
I think we do the foundation very differently if yearning for learning was already there. We could allow people to separate much earlier.
It's trying to relight a snuffed out candle.
Yep.
Right? And I think I tell people that,
And you're recruiting, you're searching for the partially snuffed out candle, if I may. But
yeah.
yeah.
So I think the problem is that we are all curious when we are young, right? But most of the time our curiosity is not satisfied or satiated, it's quenched. Because, you ask the same questions or you ask different questions to adults, and after 10 years of not getting good answers, right? I don't know if you know about Calvin and Hobbes, which is a cartoon strip. And, Calvin's dad always comes up with really funny answers. Like Calvin asks him, why are sunsets? No. What was why are the rocks red in Arizona? It's because that's where the sun sets in the West, right? And, it's things like this. So we are fobbed off, to put it colloquially, with answers that are incomplete or not satisfying. And after 10 plus years of doing this as kids, we give up, right? We just say, okay, it's not worth asking because nobody has the answers. So the curiosity is quenched, and you need to rekindle the curiosity, right? And it's hard because I don't have the answers always either, right? So it's...
No. So I think we are both thinking aloud. We are dealing with this problem, and you're kind of in this now because you're helping us do this at some level, right? I think it's an ongoing conversation. But let me extend that and say that if that is true for the education system, the corporate world has historically been designed for compliance. Because corporate processes have originated from large-scale manufacturing and replicating predictable responses at scale. And now corporations need innovation and curiosity. So let me extend that back to an answer to all the leaders in this room, that both for themselves and for the teams they lead, they have to reignite curiosity. Now, if I gave you a thing saying, hey, come and spend a day with people here and ignite curiosity, how would you approach it?
The need for doing this is much more acute in a world of AI, because AI will do all of the jobs that are automatable in any way, right? Even to a small extent automatable, the AI will just do it, right? So this compliance element will go away because those jobs don't exist in 10 years' time, as I see it, right? Because they're all done by AI. So now it is more the case of to query the AI in the right way, to get it to do your bidding, so to speak.
Okay.
Right?
I have a related question which might be relevant, because I once asked Roger Martin, who's a pretty big thinker in the overall world of management and leadership, and he was very critical of the MBA as a program. And a lot of people, including many in this room, are very critical of the MBA. And I asked him that if you were designing, okay, you said all this. Let's say we have to have an MBA program, because otherwise if I'd asked him the question, he would have said, we don't need to have MBA programs. And many people can believe that, including me to some extent. What would you teach in the first year? And his answer was physics and philosophy. Okay?
Yeah.
So, do you think a foundational course or rediscovering physics can be of some value to corporate executives?
Physics is, by its nature, sort of indulging in your curiosity, right? I think we've not all had, or we don't all have the luxury to indulge in our curiosity. When I do big science, I do science that costs, our telescope costs €1 billion, right? So it's really big science. And we recognize that we are funded by the taxpayer and by philanthropic donation, but mostly by the taxpayer. And so I feel like I owe the taxpayer, because it's their money after all that is doing this. So when I go and do outreach things, I say to the public in the audience, I say, you and I, we have a pact. You have outsourced to me the satisfaction of your curiosity. So it's my job to do the research with the money that you have given me and put it back on the front page of the New York Times or Times of India or whatever, such that you can benefit from the insights that we have gained. So, because you are interested in the outcome, how did the universe form? Where are we? Is there life elsewhere? You just don't have the luxury to dedicate time to be able to pursue that. So you are outsourcing it to me. I'm doing the research, and I will give it back to you in terms of the outputs of our research, in terms that you can understand. Because if I can't do that, then it's wasted effort or wasted money on your part and wasted effort on my part.
So excellent. I have one last question before we open to the audience, and then I might just come back to the end for some more personal wrap-up. So, what does it take to build very large telescopes, and why does it matter?
So we build very big telescopes because a big telescope collects lots of light, and lots of light means that you can see something really faint. Usually it means things that are very far away, but needn't, like the exoplanet searches that we do, they are in our backyard by comparison, right? They are very nearby, but we are searching for something which is incredibly faint. And the other reason...
Just sorry to interrupt. Because I read a bit, I know what an exoplanet is.
Oh,
the audience.
Sorry. Exoplanets are planets around other stars other than our sun. And they are where we would expect... we know already there are several thousand of them that we have observed the signatures of, and we think that some of those are very likely to harbor life, so that's where the searches are leading today. The bigger your telescope, essentially the fainter the objects you can see. The other thing is that, light is a wave, and there's something called the diffraction limit, so the bigger the telescope, the better your diffraction limit, and therefore the finer the detail you can see. So those are primarily the two reasons why we build big telescopes. If you go to long wavelengths, radio wavelengths, you can't do it with a single telescope, so you build arrays of telescopes, so square kilometer arrays, what is happening in the radio domain, so that is basically a telescope that is kilometers wide that we are building, but which currently is suffering because of lots of interference from Starlink and, things like this. So, but what does it take to build a big telescope? Somebody with a lot of vision who can give it a lot of money and then leave the researchers alone for a decade. No, I'm serious, because, in the US, every big project has to every year get refunded because of the way Congress works, and that is actually quite debilitating. You look at any typical US researcher, they're working on half a dozen projects because they don't know in next year's Congress allocation which one will get funded. So in Europe, we have the luxury that they founded something called the European Southern Observatory, which is building this telescope, and all the countries pay into it, and that is what funds the operation and the construction of the telescope, because you have to think not only of construction but also operating it, right? So these things, if you look at the extremely large telescope, it's like a Formula One car. In order for it to observe all night, all day, somebody has to work on it. Technicians have to work on it to make it be ready for the next night of observing, right? It will have, when it's ready in about 5 years' time, it will have about 1,000 segments, because we can't build a single mirror that big. And so every day during the day, 2 of those segments pop up, an overhead crane comes, picks them up, removes them, puts 2 new segments that are freshly coated back in place, and aligns them to nanometer precision so that it forms part of the same surface, so that it's ready for next night's observing. And we do this we will have to do this every single night, like the fourth bridge, because if you do 2 segments a day over 365 days, you get 700 odd segments replaced because the surface tarnishes, right? There's an adaptive secondary mirror which has 5,000 actuators behind it that is continuously changing its shape 1,000 times a second in real time to compensate for the turbulence of the Earth's atmosphere so that we can make sharp images. So it's incredibly high tech, but it's like a Formula One car. It needs a lot of upkeep to keep it going the next night, right? And then somebody has to give you the continuity to say, the same applies to CERN and particle physics, right? Somebody has to have the deep pockets to fund it for ever, essentially. And I think that continuity of funding is probably the essence of being able to do big science. But it's the same with, foreign direct investment into India, right? I would only invest money into Indian shares or industry if I knew that the government tomorrow wasn't going to turn around and put a 30% tax on all foreign investment. So I need that stability, I need that continuity, because otherwise, as a foreign investor, I will not come in and do it. The continuity is important in all walks of life, is what I'm trying to...
No, and I think the linkage is also good. I did have a question because it relates well to what we've been saying about problem solving. What is the nature of the team profile that can do something like this? And what are the challenges and in terms of getting a team like this to work together?
I mean, I have been building one instrument or leading the development of one instrument for this telescope. So that's only a small part of the whole structure, but I think it takes the time scales are long, right? So our instrument project has been running for 15 years. It will probably run for another 5. It's hard to keep the researchers motivated. So you need a whole ecosystem that allows career development for every individual in that team, because otherwise, they're not going to dedicate. I mean, I would dedicate 20 years because, somebody will put my name up in lights at the end saying, X built this instrument, which is doing wonderful science. But it's not me, right? It's a team of 100 people or 200 people who are actually doing the work, and they don't get the same recognition and the same credit that, the person at the top of the pyramid does. So how do you keep them motivated? What is in it for them that will make them work the 70 hours a week and, 365 days a year for a 10-year period? So I think you have to make it something that they want to invest their career into. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Okay. We'll open to questions. We've been fascinated. Incidentally, I worked with Professor Astrophysics on a board for 2 years. Really amazing man.
He is.
He had the ability to be very clear and at the same time non-offensive. I mean, he could tell you things that basically said, you don't know what you're talking about, but he was doing it in a kind way. So it was kind of very nice. So open to questions.
Hi, Professor. This is Praveen from Taraski. So, 3i Atlas, I've been reading it for the last, since October. And every time so there's a professor in US, and then I don't know, Harvard was a view, the physicist in Europe as a view, and you blame NASA for not getting the right quality images. Is it a comet? Which is something that we should really be, because whatever the physics we know, this piece of it is decelerations. It's unbelievably different. And the colors it emit also gives a very, very different. So again, is physics going to be rewritten at some point in time?
I'm very skeptical that it is advanced civilization kind of stuff, right? I think I would need a lot of proof to convince me. That's because we have come across so many instances in astronomy of natural phenomena which we couldn't possibly comprehend as to how this nature could do this, right? Black holes, blazars, quasars, fast radio bursts, the list is very long. So there is a lot of unpredictability or lack of human understanding, if you want to portray it in a different way, about how the universe works and what things it comes up with. So I think unless there is a strong evidence, I would be rather skeptical. That doesn't mean I'm skeptical that there is life elsewhere. I've actually very confident that there is life somewhere else. We haven't discovered it yet, but I think we will in the next 30, 50 years, evidence of life. But whether this object is a artificial object in the sense it's made by some advanced civilization, I'm rather skeptical about.
Thank you. I'm Shiva Madhive from Planck Campus. While your journey has been more on the research, my question is built on industry academia partnership or coexistence and research and development space. My observation is while this is a very established model in the society like US or in India, we are yet to travel the journey. In a personal experience, you found far more adaptability and openness working with overseas university as compared to research institutions in India. I would prefer your views on how we can travel this journey better so that India bridges that gap on R&D development between the partnership of industry and academia. If you can throw some bags.
It's interesting that you say that we do it much better in the UK and US because it doesn't feel that way from my perspective. But I think the key is the students, right? The key is the PhD students that you fund, that come to a university, that learn with some faculty member and then come back to you and learn how to apply it, or we call them case studentships at Oxford, but they're industry funded studentships. We need this. As a researcher, I want good students and I want funding to get those good students through their doctoral studies or master's studies, their research work. And I think they are the ones who are still at an early enough stage of their career and therefore perhaps pliant enough in their thinking that they would then come back and contribute. So if you ask me, that's where I would invest, right? I would invest in funded studentships at universities and say, okay, I'll give you the money to hire these students, and then, let the students choose their own path. You don't even have to force them to come work for you. I think some good fraction of them will come work for you anyway, right? Because most of the PhDs, there is no place for them in the academic structure. We have 5% of the number of PhDs is equal to the number of professorships in any university, right? So that we call it the leaky pipeline on the gender equality business, but it's a very small fraction. So where are the majority of these PhDs going? They're going back into industry, right? So why not give them the skills and why not motivate them to work in your industry?
Okay. I'm Kajal from Ranjan. Thank you for sharing. And I am nobody in astrophysics. So first I'm meeting all those things. My simple question is, you likely said for all those big and facility projects, there's a big P. But for outside world, there's only one face and one voice. So how to keep that, the big team motivated that their faces are not seen and their voices are not?
It's a very difficult question. I think astronomy doesn't do as well as maybe particle physics does. CERN is an established place where particle physics research is done, and I think they have probably a better model of authorship on papers and things like this, and we're leading smaller groups and giving them leadership roles, etc. But I think it's a good question. Astronomy still has a fair fraction of it, which is sort of the lone researcher who is, for them the telescope is just an instrument, and their brilliant minds conceive of an observing program which they then apply to get time for, and then they go make their observation, analyze their data, and produce the results. So that's why I say we don't do well, because the particle physicists have realized that lone researcher structure just doesn't work in particle physics. So they have abandoned it completely. Astronomy is sort of trying to straddle both. They have to leave some room for the lone researchers, yet they realize that, the tech, and their solution is make it all specialized. Let the engineers run the telescopes and leave the scientists sort of to use them as tools, right? But every breakthrough science I have seen has come from the people who have understood their instrument and understood. So, lots of us, we use our instruments and we get signals where half of the time the signals look like nothing we expect. It's only Penzias and Wilson who looked at that signal and said, we can't make this go away, so it must be cosmic microwave background, right? And that's a big leap because, everything from pigeon droppings to interference from radio signals was getting in their way. So it's that ability to discern when is the discovery of pulsars, Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who is actually at Oxford, the signals when they were first detected, it was thought that periodicity, so once every second, this pulsar gives a ping at radio frequencies, right? And so they were called LGM, Little Green Men 1 and Little Green Men 2, because it had to be extraterrestrial life. What else could produce a signal every second in an astrophysical context? But they were just spinning stars, right? So it is, I think, you need that ability to sort of tell apart what is to be pursued and what is not to be pursued. I think all of those discoveries have come from people who have understood the tools down to the last micro level, because that's where the unique results come from. So I'm not in favor, I'm an instrumentalist, so you probably expect me to say this. I'm not in favor of a structure where you devolve the instrument building to a group of engineers and then say, okay, as the scientist, you do your own bit, and the two, specializations diverge as time goes on.
Sorry, long answer at this. I'm not really qualified to answer this question, but I do think that the teams he's talking about are very privileged teams. It's like a huge identity boost just to be one of the 100 people on that team, right?
Yes and no, yeah. Yeah. If it doesn't give you the roti kapda makan that you need, right, then all of this is esoteric at some level, right? In the sense you need to have you talk about tenure in academia, and tenure is an outdated concept. Why do we have tenure? Because, we think that it's because that gives us the freedom to say, okay, my family and my own sustenance is covered. I don't need to worry about it. So now I can worry about whether there is life on other planets. You can't do that if you have to worry about whether your job is going to be there next month or next year.
Structural issues.
Right? So I think, okay, I'm exaggerating, but you get my point.
Yeah.
Ranjan, the privilege is a very relative task. Even with a bigger telescope, they would also like to be much bigger than that.
Yeah. So then there is always someone more, and there is always a comparison that can make you miserable. So that yeah. Naushad.
So I have a question on utility. When you decide to work on big research broadly, do you have thoughts of potential utility, of how it will be useful? Or is the objective the discovery, the excellence in science versus...
It's like the Oppenheimer question, right?
I think for me personally, it is the question for the question's sake, right? It's the spin-offs are a side product, but it's not the driving force. But different researchers may have different views on it. I don't think there's a unique answer, but I think I couldn't justify it for the spin-offs, right? So if you said, let's put lots of money into pure science because, let's launch rockets to the moon and Mars because it will produce nice spin-offs in terms of velcros or, whatever space qualified materials that are incredibly black. Why don't you just pay somebody to get the most incredibly black material you want, or, much more cost effective, right? So I don't think I can justify the funding based on the spin-offs. I can only justify the funding in the Bhiksha model of old time India, right? So, in the old days, you would say that, the kings would kind of say, okay, so you are the Brahman, you go and you gather the knowledge. But we were, and that's what we are to the taxpayers today, right? You go around begging bowl in hand saying, you give me rice to eat so that I can do my research. And literally, I mean, it's the same model, right? Om Bhavati Bhikshan Dehi is what us researchers are living off of. I mean, you may not call, you may say our salaries are too fat for that, but the principle, at least I hope I have the humility to see that is what I'm doing.
So excellent. 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 I'm going to take the liberty of taking this conversation back, and you do not have to answer the next question. It's left to you, but because we had a chat, but I think it might be helpful. Looking forward to the rest of your life, are there incidents that have shaped the way you think about your contribution? I mean, we're all close to 60. Contribution for the rest of your life.
Okay, I think I know what you're referring to. So it's a bit hard. My wife and I, we lost a son at age 5. And his name is Alexander. He was diagnosed with leukemia at 4 months. And we fought a battle with 2 bone marrow transplants for 5 years. He died age 5. And I think that has certainly shaped my life and my thinking. And I think the simplest way I can say it has shaped my thinking is that everything else pales in comparison, right? It sort of makes you realize that a lot of our daily jagad, as we call it, is petty by comparison. And you seek meaning in a different sort of way, all right? It pushed my wife more into faith. It pushed me away from faith because I couldn't see, in any world where there is a creator, I don't see why this person would let this happen, right? So it completely destroyed whatever little faith element I may have had. But it certainly shaped my life, and it certainly it changed my perspective on a lot of things. I put since, maybe because of that, but it makes you more sensitive to, or has made me more sensitive to injustice in the world. So I put a lot of effort of my time into gender equality or equality of other kinds, from trying to bring up people from disadvantaged backgrounds. We had an ayah when I was little, and she was at the bottom of the pecking order in terms of social status. And when people used to fight with her, she used to say to me, "Tei 9 mahinache, ami 9 mahinache." So the gestation time for all humans is the same. And, that was the great equalizer for her in a way. Right? And I think we need to sort of see that we are all ultimately, you may be Nobel Prize winner, but actually Nobel Prize winners are actually a very good subclass of people because they are all very humble. And I think without fail. And I think being at that pinnacle of science brings that humility, which is phenomenal. But I think it's essential to make us all human, right? So whatever you do in your lives, please keep your humanity. That's all I would say.
Just the humility and the vulnerability, and thanks for sharing that. And it cannot have been easy. I'll come back to the decision to teach at Nayanta. Here you are one of the best researchers in the world, and 2 people ask you, come back and teach, and many of these guys have not done science. Why did you agree? And what has this been like, honestly?
I don't know. It's still early in the journey, so I don't know what I can say, whether it's worked or not. But
for the students, it worked.
Feeling that I want to give back, because I think, as I said earlier, in my research, I have a pact with society in terms of them outsourcing the satisfaction of their curiosity to us as researchers. I think this is a different way of looking at the same thing that, I started with astronomy as a hobby. It has now become my profession. So I have the luxury of being paid to do what I like to do. I think that is a real luxury, and I think I need to give back to the people who have made it possible, which is society broadly, not a particular person. That more people can have that luxury someday of being paid to do what you like to do, right? Yeah. The only problem with your hobby becoming your profession is I've been left without a hobby, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
So anyway, we would.
It's why Nayanta exists.
We would love to kind of have you help us through this journey, and hopefully we'll touch a few lives on the way. I'll close with the question. I think we're running out of time. I'm sorry. You can spend time with them. Okay, my whole last question, and then I'll close with my last one.
So I think it's so fascinating to hear what you shared. It's a life story. The thing is, in India, and I talk about my children, they lack ideas. I don't know whether my generation also had one, but they lack ideas. Why don't you expand so that they can hear people like you speak?
Okay, I don't know. I'm happy to sort of put whatever I say out there. I don't know whether that's what people want. I don't know. I guess I'm a shy person.
No.
I'm not on social media or anything like this. So
I think the best inspiration comes from people who are not trying to be inspiring. So that's why I think this conversation works, and that's why I told this would be a demo. So it seems almost a mundane question, but there are two levels to this question. How does somebody like you stay in touch with the cutting edge in your field beyond your work? And how do you stay in touch with what is happening in the rest of the world? So essentially, how do you read? How do you learn? What do you read? How do you learn?
Technically, I read papers and I have stimulating conversations with co-researchers. So that's how, you need to be able to bounce ideas off of somebody. And
how will you stay in touch with the world outside astrophysics? What else do you read?
I read The Economist religiously for the last 30 years. Sorry to say, but the economics is not my field, but it's a fantastic magazine that just gives you everything in.
Nafsad is smiling. That's what he does too.
I happened upon it when I was at Berkeley, and I was at Munich. Sorry, and since then haven't stopped.
Okay, just a big round of applause for Niranjan. Fantastic, Banerjee. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this and being a sport, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation.